Welcome to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen, where we help you navigate the challenges of feeding your family and learn about the role food plays in our health and relationships. Feeding and food relationships can be stressful, confusing, and even destructive. I'm Kristen Saxena, a pediatrician and mother of 4 who's been researching and sharing what I've learned about feeding for over 10 years. In this podcast, I'll share my experience and expertise to help our kids and ourselves with everyday survival tips for real parents. This podcast is about progress, not perfection. So let's get started. Welcome back to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen, where we help you navigate the challenges of feeding your family and discuss the role that food plays in our health and relationships. I'm Dr. Kristen Saxena. I'm a pediatrician, mom of 4, and self-proclaimed feeding nerd. And on today's episode, we will be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is family meals. But before we get started, I am very excited to announce that for this episode, we're going to be doing a giveaway. So I have 2 brand new copies of our guest's book, The Surprising Power of Family Meals. So all you need to do to be eligible to receive one of these copies is to comment on how you like this show. You can comment on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube channels, and then you'll be eligible to win one of these copies. I'll give you a brand new copy, not my well-loved written in dog-eared copy. And so best of luck. Let's get started. So family meals. Family meals is, I've come to realize, I truly believe that family meals are kind of the holy grail in terms of good nutrition, feeding your family well, helping them develop good habits for not only eating, but really skills for life. And as you know, I have been really interested in feeding and nutrition for years. And I would say early on in this interest, I was super interested in foods and the health value of certain foods, and really kind of what is the best diet that we should be following. And I would say really as a young physician, that was my main focus, is trying to figure that out and how do we apply that and how do we counsel patients about that. But as I did more research and through my experience with my own patients and really my experience in my own life, feeding myself and feeding my growing family, I really came to realize that more important than what we were eating was how we were eating. And so what I mean by how is things like having structured meal times and snack times, having a division of responsibility in feeding your children in terms of parents deciding what, when, where we're going to eat, and kids deciding kind of how much of what's offered that they're going to eat. Things like planning and prepping, all of those things. I still believe that what you eat is important in your health, but many-fold more, I believe that how you feed your family and how you feed yourself is far more important. So really, though, as I looked at it, the foundation of all the hows is the family meal. And in my mind, there's no better expert in the family meal than our guest today, Miriam Weinstein. Thanks for being with us, Miriam.
Well, thanks for having us.
Just you, the royal we. No, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background just to get us started?
Okay. My background is in journalism, and I worked for newspaper chains and wrote for magazines. And I was looking for book topics. I was researching something completely different when I came across some research about the fact that family meals seem to have, as you said, this sort of magical effect. And a group at Columbia University was studying many different things, trying to see what helped kids avoid using drugs, all kinds of negative outcomes. And they were quite surprised to find that family meals were the most important. And at that point, I was in total shock because I had never thought about family meals. At that point, my children were sort of grown and out of the house. And I had always had family meals because I didn't know you were allowed to not have family meals. And I thought, wow, so I've actually been doing something good and maybe this means something. And the more research I did, I just came across more and more ways that it was important. And so I wrote this book. It was quite a while ago. And I've since gone on to lecture about this topic, travel around the country and even internationally. And it just expands and expands. And even now in the pandemic, it's really important.
Absolutely. And in your book, one of the things that you talk about is part of the magic of this is that it's really accessible to everyone. And so can you talk a little bit about how it really is possible for anyone to sort of institute this practice and maintain it?
Yes. One of the things that is so difficult for people, especially parents with young children, is that they just don't want to have one more burden. But having a meal together is not a burden. Once you sort of get in the habit, it's a pleasure. And once you get into the pleasure part of it, you get a lot from it. Your family gets a lot from it. And you can do so much good by just this very simple thing. And you don't have to be a great cook. You don't have to be anything special other than who you are.
Absolutely. I think when you're talking about that, I think as a parent, so I have younger kids, not super young, but 6 to 13. So we're kind of in the thick of it in terms of we're starting to get into that age where everyone's got activities that they're involved in. And you mentioned this in your book as well, but you feel that pressure that your kids need to be in sports and playing instruments and in all kinds of extracurriculars. And then you add to that, work schedules. And God forbid that, as a parent, you want to go to the gym or do something to better your own life outside of work or something like that. So you have all these pressures to kind of get these things done. And I think for a lot of parents, that's what gets in the way or sort of is that barrier to actually going forth and having these meals together.
Right.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just saying that you talk a lot about that. And so as you were mentioning, I think that the idea that we feel so much pressure because we think we need to secure our future for our kids and make sure that they're all doing all these things when the reality is most of our kids are not going to be Olympic gymnasts or NFL football players or, play in the orchestra.
But they are going to be part of a family for their whole lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what one of the big goals should be, is to help them learn how to be part of a family.
Yeah. And I think that one of the most impactful things for me in that book that I read and kind of repeated over and over again, I don't remember the exact line, but it was something that when you talk about it being so also beneficial for the parents, is that line where you say, you sit there at the dinner table and this is how we are, right? Like this is us right now. I wish I could remember the line, but you see everyone there just as they are and they never will be again. And so that even makes me a little
I know.
teary.
I'm thinking, that was a good line. Yeah.
That was, yeah.
Right. Because, you tend to think of a ritual. I started off by being surprised that the family meal was actually a ritual. And you think of rituals as being something big and grand, or maybe connected to religion. But a ritual is any habit with meaning. And if you sort of put an imaginary frame around where you are, put that frame around the dinner table, and this is what your family does. This is who you are. And think about, is that what you want to be? Is that how you want your kids to remember what's going on now? Because you very clearly remember what went on when you were a kid. And if you think about it that way, it's your family's ritual, and the meaning comes from you.
And you talk also a lot about the benefits of those rituals in terms of outcomes for kids and resilience. Can you talk to us a little bit about that too?
Well, over the years, there's been assorted research. For instance, one group found that children who had more family meals knew more about their families. And because when you're sitting around the dinner table is when you normally tell stories, like, some kid does something wrong and you say, oh, yes, well, Uncle Seymour always did that. And the kids can realize, oh, yes, well, I'm not a bad person for having done that. The whole family, we have all different kinds of people in our family, and you can see where you fit in. And those kinds of things happen naturally around the table. You don't have to kind of build in lessons or build in identity, but it's so helpful for kids to have that sense of belonging. And in this particular research, it was done right before 9/11. And so they had measured kids who had a lot of family meals as opposed to kids who didn't. And they found that after the trauma of 9/11, the kids who had a lot of family meals were more resilient, which seems pretty simplistic. But on the other hand, it makes sense. You want to feel like you belong. This is where you come from. This is, whatever you're doing may be great. It may be not so great, but it just makes you feel more secure.
Absolutely. I think that the other point that comes along with that, because obviously I'm really into food and feeding, so we were already doing pretty well in terms of number of family meals together. But I think that the other point that you bring up is what happens around the table is the storytelling. And I think that is maybe another thing to be conscious of as a parent, because I would say that despite my chattiness here right now, I don't think I'm like the biggest storyteller all the time. Or at least I think it made me more conscious. Not that I have to come to dinner with a story to tell or anything like that, but to think of it as an opportunity to say, if it pops in your head, your story of your uncle who did the same thing, now's the time to share it, because I think it's easy to overlook the importance of things like that in kids' lives. So I thought that was a really good point that you brought up.
And there's also research that shows that kids who have more family meals have bigger vocabularies, because that is really how you learn to talk as a child, telling stories. And the kids who had bigger vocabularies, when they showed up in kindergarten with bigger vocabularies, they did better in learning to read. And they traced those metrics all the way through high school for one group, and they held up all the way through, which is just amazing. Like if your preschooler has family meals, the odds are they're going to do better in school all the way through. Mm-hmm. So, it's hard to argue with that.
Absolutely. There's so much emphasis on early childhood education and that importance of being at grade level. I think it's by grade 3. If you're not at grade level for reading, the odds that you're going to catch up are very low. So I think, like you said, and if I remember correctly too, that the research had shown that even more so than being read to, which is, I think, very important and something that's very commonly suggested and kind of preached to get kids in that kindergarten readiness and reading readiness. It's super interesting to see that really family meals may be even more important than something like reading to your child, which is just kind of mind-blowing, I think.
I know it. I was so shocked when I found that out. Yes, because we sort of hold up, read to your child. It's such a virtuous thing to do. But in fact, talk to your child is more important.
Right. That's incredible. The other thing that you mentioned earlier was COVID. And I think that changed a lot of things for a lot of families. And I'd be interested to hear what you have to say and kind of what your observations and the information that you have received. I know for a lot of people I knew, especially professional people that had been working outside the home and then maybe were working at home, for them, I think that perhaps it was helpful in terms of being able to institute more family meals, but I don't know overall what have been your observations, or what have you learned?
Well, at this point, it's all observational because nobody's done this research yet. But people have been stuck at home, and they've been stuck at home with their families. And one of the difficulties that people had during these lockdowns have been the sort of floating sense of time, and being very hard to anchor in time. And to have a schedule, a mealtime schedule, to have regular times that you will get together has been very helpful for a lot of people. And also, a lot of people have found that they've been more focused on food, because, that's what there is. There have been so many other pleasures that have been taken away from us, so that meal times have become extremely important for a lot of families. And having kids in the kitchen was a new experience for a lot of people. That's a whole other topic. But really, family meals have been really, really a godsend to a lot of people during COVID.
Yeah. Do you think that that's also related to, well, I hope that maybe that will help also build some of that resilience for our families and our kids, because, it's certainly traumatic on many levels for people. And so you hope that piece, as I kind of try to look for the silver linings in all of the situation, you hope that being able to kind of strengthen that would be good. Now, I also think, it was easier to do family meals because kids' sports were canceled. Yeah, there was nowhere to go, right? So we were all home anyways. But do you have any words of wisdom, or as things start to open up, as kids' activities and sports resume, is there words of wisdom in terms of keeping that a priority?
I would say just keep it intentional, because if you think about, as you said, the good things that have come out of COVID, and this is one of them, remember that and build it into your schedule, because if you don't build it into your schedule, it's not going to happen, because we as a society do not privilege family meals. Although in the past few years, there's been more recognition about their benefits, but still, our schedules do not give us a lot of leeway for that. And as things open up again and all the busyness begins again, and kids are on a million teams and have lessons and parents have meetings, make it part of your schedule and let your family know that you are doing it. Don't be shy about saying it. This is dinner time. We eat at such and such a time. We are all together. This is what we are doing. Don't just let it slide. Be aware of it and do it.
Right. And one of the other topics that you talked about was, well, maybe the first step is to just ask you, like, in your research, can you talk a little bit about the benefits to the children that you saw? You talked a little bit about reading readiness and things of that nature, but just all the benefits that you saw that seemed to come or be associated with increased number of family meals together.
The resilience, the smaller likelihood of negative behaviors like addiction, like alcoholism, like teen pregnancy. Amazingly, these things all correlate with family meals. So now there is a sort of a myth that's gone around that kids who have more family meals are more likely to have merit scholarships. That one's not true. but all these other things actually are true. Also lower rates of obesity if you have family meals, because the other thing that we actually haven't talked about at all is that one of the benefits of having family meals is that you learn what a meal is. And you are more likely to eat a nutritional meal if you are eating at home and if you are eating with your family. So it's helpful on both ends of the scale. Kids are less likely to be obese. And if you have family meals, that helps sort of ward off against eating disorders of all sorts.
Yeah. And that's kind of another thing with eating disorders. I think you commented too that a little bit our society, even if we don't have diagnosable eating disorders, it's the society at large seems to have disordered eating, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So,
and yeah, the thing that I've noticed more and more as time has gone on is that we have gotten so segmented in our eating. I don't eat this. I only eat that. Yes, but this person only eats this, and that person only eats that. And sometimes it's couched. Sometimes there is a nutritional value. Sometimes we say there's some nutritional value. Sometimes we don't know. We're making it up or whatever we read about or heard about. But it's sort of, for lots of people, it's become a religion substitute or a sort of marker of, sanctity. I would never eat that. Oh, yuck. I can't believe that you eat this. And it just becomes very difficult to have a meal if everybody is, in their own food obsession. Mm-hmm. So what you would hope to do would be to tamp down some of that and just encourage normal, whatever normal is in your world.
In terms of modeling that in your own family. And
yes.
I think that also relates to something that I call or am familiar with, like kind of an all foods fit model. Obviously, there are, like you said, religious reasons or perhaps legitimate health reasons or allergies or something that might make certain foods important to exclude or avoid. But beyond that, I think, like you said, it's ended up, sometimes it can become quite a barrier. And I'm sure you've experienced, or we've all experienced it, is it becomes more difficult to invite people in and cook for them in your home because all of a sudden, like you said, you have to ask, like, what are your dietary restrictions? What are all of these things? And it's like almost impossible to think of a meal that fits everyone's dietary restrictions. And so it ends up, restaurants or things like that where everyone can eat their own food separately.
Yes. It becomes, right. As you say, it just becomes not worth it to invite people for dinner because it's just a minefield.
Yeah. And that may be part of one of multiple reasons maybe why practices like that might be dwindling. Mm-hmm. So maybe being able to do your part in your family to help raise people that have a wider food acceptance level through your family meals. I think hopefully you can do your part at home.
Right.
I think this might also relate to, so you have a more recent book that's about mourning or grief and loss.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But another thing, so I was actually speaking with yesterday a woman who works at a nonprofit organization here in Omaha that's focused on grieving and loss. And we were actually talking about something that you touched on, I think also in your book, which was sort of the nothing speaks louder than an empty chair at the table. And can you just talk a little bit too, just sort of about this emotional piece that's really so strongly tied with family meals and feeding and how deep those emotions run?
Yes. I think I'd like to talk about what a family is, because that's that can be a difficulty for some people. Mm-hmm. One reason that people think they can't do family meals or don't want to do family meals is that they are not the correct family, or what they do is not going to be as good as they remember or as they envision or whatever. But really, a family is people who care for each other. And what your family is what your family is. And it can be very difficult in cases of death or divorce or some kind of family trauma. But rather than ignoring it or avoiding it, better to have the community of who you are. Mm-hmm. There, for instance, a woman who I wrote about in the book, she was divorced, and so she was and had two little boys, and she just felt she couldn't deal with meals, so she just didn't. And things just went progressively downhill until at a certain point she decided, no, this is who we are. Let's figure it out. And she began to include the boys in the meal planning. Then they really got into it. They would, then they would say, oh, tonight's going to be Mexican, so let's learn about Mexico. Tonight's going to be French, so let's learn about France. And they became a family. Mm-hmm. And that was who their family became. So you don't have to sweep the negative under the rug. And you can use the getting together for mealtime as part of the new healing and part of the new who we are. I mean, if it's necessary, take a chair away from the table or move everybody's seats around so that we're not just sitting looking at that empty chair. Just, as I've gone around and talked about this topic, the sad thing is how many parents don't feel confident. So the thing I would like to try to say is, it's your family. Do it. There's nobody better than you in your house. You are the best person in your house to do this. So go ahead. Whatever you do, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be the best thing that your family ever has.
I think that that's great. I actually gifted a copy of your book to a friend of mine who she was divorced with children and had now kind of entered into a relationship with another person and his kids. And it was interesting because she talked about how different it is, that you don't think about it, but when you've been living as a family, eating the way that you do, doing your rituals, and suddenly you're combining with a new family and their rituals. And I think that she was having a little bit of stress or frustration just sort of around between all the kids' schedules and sort of their different habits that weren't aligned. They weren't eating together, or they weren't maybe they didn't realize that it would be so important to be able to make this work, and kind of the establishment of the new rituals of the new unit, and maybe the importance of that in terms of helping them become sort of the new family unit. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I have friends who were on a second marriage, and luckily they had 5 children. The combined family was 5 children. So by the time they were teenagers and both parents were working, each child was given a night in which they were responsible for dinner. Yeah. And one child was a very adventurous cook. One child made the same thing every Tuesday night, year after year after year after year. But that's okay. That was how this new family became what it was.
Well, I think that's maybe another question is, how do you counsel people? Because we say, obviously, this is important. And I think as you discuss the research and the data surrounding it, you say, okay, this seems legitimately an important thing to do. But like you said, lacking the confidence or somewhere in there, there's a disconnect where they feel, but I can't do it, or this doesn't work for me. What do you tell people?
Start small. Start where you are. Wherever you are is where you are. And if you have 0 meals together a week, then you want to have 1. Or start with a birthday meal. It doesn't have to be 1 a week. It just has to be a meal. If you never have cooked in your life, then start with having a meal in which you all eat the same takeout food, or at least find 1 meal that you are able to prepare, and prepare it, like that teenager did. Make the same meal once a week. That's fine. Start where you are, because where you are is, what you're going to do is you're going to improve it. You're not, so don't hold yourself up to some standard of the way it should be, because that's not how it should be for your family.
Absolutely. And I like that idea of just making progress and not expecting things to be perfect, because I think that's the other thing in the world of social media and Instagramming, and it looks like everyone's lives and meals are perfect and everyone's happy and every meal's, organic, vegetarian, farmer's market, and so you start to be like, I just can't. And so it's easy sometimes to say, well, if I can't, I'm just going to not. And so
Right.
I think just giving yourself that grace and that permission to say, where we are is fine, and we're going to start here. And then if it feels good and it's working, we're going to build on that.
So I'm going to say that one of the most interesting things I learned about from interviewing people for this book is there's a person, Rybczynski, who did a lot of writing about emotional states and psychological states and flow. And when I kept trying to ask him, well, what's the most important thing about family meals? He said, eat facing each other, sit facing each other. I mean, that is so simple, but it makes a huge difference, because that is sort of the baseline. That means that you are going to take some time and some intention. You're not going to sit in the car and have kids eating from a paper bag in the back seat. You're not going to have kids taking food to their room and eating in front of their screens. You are going to sit facing each other. So if you are doing nothing and you feel like, oh, I can't have this perfect meal, just find some place where you can sit together. And that is going to change things, because you're more likely to talk to each other. You're more likely to notice what other people are eating. So I just want to make a plug for that one really simple thing you can do.
I think so too. And I think that's an important message, because two of the things that I would say I've observed either through my friend circle or would observe through pediatrics patients is, I think that two common pitfalls or sort of paths that parents sometimes go down, generally with very good intentions, is number one, feeding the kids separately than the parents. So the kids either have a separate meal because they think that the kids won't eat or won't like whatever the parents want to eat, or maybe even a separate meal time, maybe because of work schedules or just because it's more convenient to cook for the kids first so that the parents can enjoy something later. And number two is the practice I've seen fairly frequently of kind of propping up the iPad, but in terms of younger children, sort of with that idea that I don't know if they consciously do it, but so that the child will sit long enough to eat a meal. And obviously, though, kind of with that, I think it certainly is not difficult to correlate then that with kind of mindless eating. So basically, like teaching the child that if they're just going to sit there and watch their show, they won't even realize that they're being fed. And I always find that interesting, because as a parent, I believe, I've not ever read this anywhere, but I've always believed there's something inherent, like inside of you, that you very deeply want to see your child eat. So, I mean, I believe it's some sort of caveman instinct where it's like, if you don't eat when the food is here, you're going to starve and die. Obviously, that does not relate to the world that most of us live in at this point, and we're more at risk for having an excess of food. And so I never saw any of my patients starve and die. It just didn't happen. So I think it's interesting that, as we're so worried that parents are so worried their children aren't going to eat, that I think that it becomes easy for them to fall into these patterns in order to get food in them, that in the long run, I think things like you're not eating face to face, you're not eating the same food, that we're missing out on all the benefits that come from really, like you said, what could be such a simple change or simple just paradigm shift, I guess, in the way that we approach feeding them.
Mm-hmm. And the other really simple thing that I learned and that you alluded to is the idea that parents put the food on the table. They're in charge of that, of setting up a meal times and dependable meal times and serving hopefully nutritious food. But the child is in charge of how much and whether to eat. And boy, that really opened my mind. And I only learned that after my kids were grown up. I wish somebody had said that before, because gosh, that just takes all the fire out of so many of these worries and fights, and just let, you make a mealtime, you make the food, put it down. Well, you don't have to make it. That's a separate issue. Put it in front of the child. The child gets to decide how much or if.
Mm-hmm. And that helps so much to take that stress, and it essentially eliminates the mealtime battles. Right. Even though I feel like, again, it's that caveman instinct that I've got to find the research for this. It's got to exist. But I think when you say it, everyone knows what you're talking about. It's something inside of you that seems counterintuitive. But like
you can't believe that if the child doesn't eat. I mean, yes, it's a great idea. I'll just put this down and you just decide, mm-hmm. right? But you don't really believe it.
Well, I think even knowing it in the back of my head, I don't bat 100% on that by any means. Once in a while, it's like, you got to eat this. You need to eat something, As my 13-year-old going to school, they're kind of at that age where, I don't know, I think his stomach wakes up around noon or something. And it's like, it's hard, in your head. You're like, you're not going to be able to focus in school. The world's going to end. But,
Right. And also, so it depends on which kind of kids you have, and some kids that don't, that have a harder time just putting in more food, they have to learn that actually if they don't eat the food at breakfast, they will be hungry an hour later.
Yeah.
Some kids don't have so much trouble with that, and some kids do. So you want them to learn that.
Right.
But it's,
Absolutely. So another thing that you had mentioned when we were just talking before was something about how the meal times you're creating can actually be as good as or better than the meal times that maybe you grew up with. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, that's a big issue for people, both ways. Some people remember family meals as being wonderful, and they are just so sure that they can never create something as wonderful. And on the flip side, some people had family meals that were just awful, and they do not want to go anywhere near it. So but the point is that what you are doing now is what your children will remember. So you can create something that takes the best parts out of other meals that you have learned about and only use the best parts. It's up to you. You can make it as, you can do it.
What about people because at least for me, I grew up in sort of the 80s and 90s, and I feel like that was the heyday of processed foods. So I think that, if you didn't come from a family that cooking was, or home cooking, kind of scratch cooking was a high priority, and you didn't feel like you learned those skills growing up besides just, rewarming, I think, again, that becomes like kind of a barrier, or people have sort of low self-esteem. Do you have any tips or suggestions for people that just say, well, I don't know how to cook?
Start small. Start very, very, very small. Just think of one meal that you would like to learn how to cook, and just learn how to cook that one meal. Or start small by looking in your cupboard and in your freezer and in your spice cabinet and seeing what is always there, and think about what you actually enjoy eating and what you might keep as sort of staples that can be a backup for you. Because the other thing to learn if you don't know how to cook is just what to keep in the house. Because if you don't have pots and pans, if you don't have the staples, and every family is going to be different in terms of what staples mean for them. But learn how to keep things at home in a simple way. And again, what works for you in your life and your family. You're not going to turn from zero into a gourmet cook. And that's not the goal. Maybe it is a goal, or maybe it isn't. But you don't have to, that's not what you have to do.
Absolutely. It kind of brought to mind, so my parents divorced when I was a teenager, and my dad remarried when I was in college. And so he's been with his wife for quite a while now. And unfortunately, in the last year, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she was kind of the cook in the couple. And but she was kind of incapacitated for a while, and they weren't really able to go anywhere. And I know my dad really wanted to take good care of her, and felt a little bit like he didn't. He said, "I don't cook. I don't know how to cook. I've never cooked." One thing I thought was cool that kind of brings into me the idea of accepting help or finding help. We ended up getting him hooked up with kind of those meal kits, those meal delivery kits. And, it's all sort of cut out, very specific instructions. Everything's chopped, tells you step by step what to do. And I will tell you that, I could see the confidence in him increase and the joy that he had just from cooking. And it was great. And so I thought, why wait till, he's almost 70 years old it's wonderful that he had that. And I thought, well, I think that as you're talking about, even as teenagers or as, young adults or young families, I think something like that could kind of also act as sort of a bridge or a stepping stone into gaining a little bit more confidence in the kitchen, and maybe making it something that's more attainable for you, because really, it cuts out a lot of the shopping, all kinds of steps to sort of make it maybe something that's more doable and a confidence builder once you kind of are like, okay, I know how to use the oven, I know how to saute things on the stove, maybe I can kind of branch out from that. And so I think that that's another thing is, obviously that costs money. So if you have the ability to do something like that, I think that's a good option. But just keeping in mind that you don't have to do everything by yourself. So maybe that's an option for you, but maybe something else is an option for you, but look for help and be okay with accepting help. Again, it doesn't have to be, Betty Crocker and I made everything from scratch. I've been working all day. So yeah. I think that that's another thing that maybe, like you said, kind of start small or baby steps. That might be something that people could consider.
Yes, because that's something that's an option that's really grown, and you have a lot of choices now.
Yeah. So maybe the one of the last things to ask you about is just the message of, because again, as you talked about this in your book, and I think it's kind of always in the back of your mind while you're learning about the data that surrounds family meals, is the family meal the chicken or the egg, or is it the cause, or just sort of an association with a lot of these positive outcomes that we're seeing for kids? So what would be your response to that?
Well, from what I've been able to learn, it's not just the chicken or the egg. In fact, even there was some research about dysfunctional families. Even very dysfunctional families, if they manage to get together for a meal, they do better than the families that don't manage to do it. Families with a parent who was suffering from alcohol severely and the family could barely manage to be together in any way. If they could manage to have a meal together, the rest of that family did better. And the rest of the family could think of themselves in a better way. Like, we have this issue in our family, but we're still able to do this. So that's the thing that I have come away with. Yes, you assume that if there's something wonderful, a family that is, organized and healthy and together, they'll be able to do the wonderful thing. But what about the family that isn't? And what I've learned is, even if you are, whatever issues you have, if you can manage to do this one thing, it will put you that much further ahead. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, is there any other messages or anything that you would have for our listeners about family meals?
Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. Do what works for you. Just be intentional about it. Be aware of what you're doing and do the best thing that you can do and enjoy it. Don't do it as a misery. Do it as a pleasure.
I love it. Well, the next segment of our show, I don't think I told you about, but we do a segment that's called Ask Me Anything. And the surprise part is it's also Ask You Anything. So we'll have a couple of questions and share our answers from our listeners.
And now it's time for your questions. Ask Me Anything with Dr. Kristen on the Feeding the Family podcast. Our first listener question is, what does the research show about the benefits of family eating together for adults, even when kids have left the home?
I didn't find any research about that, I'll be honest, but anecdotally, it just makes people feel better. And it can make the adult relationship more secure because, again, you know that there's a time that you're going to get together. You know that there's going to be a time that is not about stress or arguing, but just about sort of connecting every day. So anecdotally, it works just fine for people who don't have children. Yes, it's not all children.
I was going to say, too, I think that even if you say, like, if you're grown and your children have left the house, I think we always think about building resilience and helping our children. But the truth is, too, is that is a change. And I think that could build resilience for the maybe newly empty nesters and creating rituals kind of for your new nuclear family unit, which the dynamics have changed quite a bit. And so I think that could also be helpful for adults. And I think the other thing that you've mentioned multiple times is just the way that it promotes more healthy eating habits, the way that socializing with someone while you eat maybe slows down your eating and also might help you to, say, like, limit the pace at which you're eating food, be more aware of sort of your own satiety and things like that as you're eating.
Our next question is, in the age of COVID and video chats becoming more prevalent, is it beneficial for families to get together via video chat, via Google Connect or Zoom for their family dinner?
We've actually done that, and it was kind of touching. It was definitely touching. You put the computer on the table, and you sit and you talk to your family who's half a continent away, and it was very touching.
I absolutely agree. I think that is one of the cool things, again, if we're going to be looking for silver linings, the way that everyone's gotten more comfortable and familiar with Zoom and FaceTiming, it actually allows us to expand maybe our definition even of family and have that FaceTime with people, that face-to-face experience, and maybe get some of those benefits that we get from that, from the family meals, from people we, in previous years and generations, maybe never would.
And our last question is there anything that shows that family dinners, family gatherings like this can benefit senior citizens, even so far as to extend life and the amount of years a person lives?
I haven't seen any research that speaks to that. To be honest, most of the research is focused around children. But in general, research, now that I'm saying it, there was research that correlated death dates for old people. And people will tend to live up to and a little bit past a holiday. Depending on what your religion is or your background is. And this was a cross-cultural study. So if your big holiday is Christmas, the death rates are low right before Christmas. People want to live through Christmas, and then they will die afterwards. You want to have something to look forward to. You want to have something that has meaning for you.
So I'm not aware of any specific research on that, but I will say anecdotally from my own life. So this May, my 99-and-a-half-year-old grandmother actually moved in with us. And I will say the reason she moved in with us was because she'd previously been living independently, but she was living in an assisted living apartment. And I know the last year and a half, or I think it's going on 2 years, she's a very social person. And she ended up being very isolated in her apartment because of COVID. And, they weren't allowed to do sort of the communal eating. She wasn't allowed to socialize with her friends the way that she used to. And unfortunately, she ended up having a fall and getting hospitalized. And so she ended up in sort of the nursing home arm of the place that she was living. And again, having been in the hospital, she was completely isolated and just was kind of going downhill fast. Like, we realized that she wasn't, without being able to have the visitors and the socializing, she was really not doing well. And she had previously been very vibrant and active and mentally coherent. So we made the decision to move her in with us in May. And I will tell you that the transformation in her since that time is incredible. So she's funny, she's laughing, she's been taken off of multiple of her medications since she has started living at our house. And I'm not doing anything, I'm not providing any crazy treatments, we're not doing anything in particular except, honestly, between my kids, we are all busy. We're living life, going to work, going to school, going to kids' activities. We're not necessarily, just sitting there caring for her all day. She has someone always there. But, I think some of the biggest thing is that we all just sit together at dinner time. She has somebody to sit and talk to at meal times. She eats like a horse. She wouldn't be embarrassed for me to say that, but she eats incredibly well. And I think it's just that, again, it really reinforced for me. We always look at the kids, but her health and her well-being, her level of stress and her mental status in 3 months has just improved substantially. And the rest of our family is just like, I don't even know how this happened. We joke that she's like Benjamin Button, like she's aging backwards. And so again, there's no research or anything behind that, but like to in front of my face, be able to see that transformation, I would say just kind of being part of a family and a family meal again. It's those things that you can't really measure, but when you see it,
wonderful. And are you planning a birthday party for her?
Yeah, her birthday's in December, so we're going to have to get some big plans for a big blowout. So
that's great.
Thank you. Before you leave us, what is the best way for, I know I purchased my books off of Amazon, and if our listeners are not one of our lucky winners, what is that the best way to get? Yeah. Okay. And also can look up more information about you, your current work, your past work on MiriamWeinstein.com. Perfect. And again, if you haven't already, go ahead and comment on our Facebook, our Instagram, or our YouTube channels. And hopefully you'll be one of our lucky winners for our book giveaway. And if you enjoyed our discussion, please also like, follow, and subscribe. And we hope you tune in next week for another exciting discussion on Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen. Thank you.